Once again, a very warm good afternoon to everyone. We are here today for the second lecture in this lecture series, this course on self and experience, philosophy, self and consciousness. So, just a brief introduction to the course. This course attempts to look at interdisciplinary engagements in the conceptual frameworks that are required to study the constitution of human experience and the place of self and consciousness in it. So it is quite uniquely interdisciplinary in the sense that it attempts to explore the context of self-experience in philosophy, not only in its usual sense, but in the sense from the perspective of philosophy, from the perspective of Indian indigenous systems of healthcare, from the perspectives of aesthetics, from the perspective of social sciences, from the perspective of psychology and psychiatry, and from the perspective of literature. So this extremely unique conceptualization is completely attributed to the Dean School of Humanities and also the Head Consciousness Studies program, Professor Sangeeta Menon. And I think that especially given the varied interests of the participants, as well as the rather diverse backgrounds of the speakers, I think this platform provides a very uniquely interdisciplinary framework to examine the context of self and experience in from various lenses. So we have a series of 18 lectures that have been planned for you, and this is the second lecture. And it gives me very great pleasure to welcome Dr. Saurabh Todaria, who is the speaker for today. Welcome, sir. Briefly to introduce sir, Dr. Saurabh joined NIAS in 2019. His research interests include phenomenology, philosophy of mind, Advaita Vedanta. Dr. Saurabh Todaria has completed his MPhil and PhD in philosophy from the Center for Philosophy, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has worked both in academics and social organizations in various capacities before joining NIAS. He has also taught in Delhi University and worked with the India Education Collective at Azim Premji Foundation before joining NIAS. He has published various articles in peer-reviewed journals and regularly presents papers at various national and international fora. He is currently exploring at NIAS the relationship between the body and transcendence in Kashmiri Shaivism from a phenomenological point of view. So without further ado, I welcome you, sir, and for the lecture. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you, Dr. Pushya. Thanks for the generous introduction. So first of all, I would like to thank Professor Sangeeta Menon for giving me opportunity to present in this wonderful course where, as Dr. Pushya aptly suggested, have a lot of interdisciplinary convergences between philosophy, social sciences, and the health. And also, I would like to thank our team members, Dr. Pushya, Niharika, Meera, Ashwani, for supporting me to in this talk. So with these words, I would like to start. I have made basically the PowerPoint presentation for this talk. So I would like to request Dr. Pushya to share among the participants.
Dr. Pushya, you can
Is it visible?
editing. Yeah, it is visible. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. So today's topic is phenomenology of embodiment and analysis of the shift from I see to I can. So this is the earlier version of this talk has been presented in the NIAS CSP course last year, Phenomenology and the Social Research. And I'm especially thankful to the participants and participants in the course who gave the valuable feedbacks, comments, which helped me to think further through these issues and to modify it. So with this word, I would like to start this talk. Can you, next slide, please?
Just 1 minute, sir.
Yeah, please.
The slide is not moving.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. You
Pushpa,
take your time. No
do
issue.
you want me to share the
Yeah, I'd be
screen?
very, yeah, could you please,
Yeah,
Niharika?
yeah. Please, can you stop sharing?
Yeah,
I'll stop. Yeah. We are sorry about this. I hope it's visible.
yeah, it's visible.
Sir, is this okay?
Yeah. So here we start that phenomenology of embodiment. Now, when we talk about the body in philosophy, so how do we understand the body? So the major way of understanding the body is through the Cartesian tradition, which is very famous, like Descartes' distinction between the mind and body. And why Descartes has made this distinction? Because Descartes was a rational philosopher with whom the modern philosophy has started, and he comes up with the question that we only believe in the things for which we have the conclusive proof. So he says that we need to define the things by their basic fundamental characteristics. So, so with this, he comes that only two things we can be sure of. One is like mind, and another is the body. So, fundamental characteristics of the body is extension, while the characteristics of consciousness, mind is consciousness. So, this duality between the mind and body, consciousness and the matter, this is the basic dualism of Cartesian philosophy. Now, on the basis of that, how do we understand the body in philosophical tradition, mainstream philosophical tradition? So, body has been considered as an instrument. That body is only an instrument by whose job is to supply the sensory data, and it is the mind which processes it further. So, this is the one conception of the body as an instrument. Second, body is something which lies outside. Mind is something which is internal to us, which is something we are in the directly contact with, while the body is something which is outside. Spatiality, and the characteristic of the body is spatiality. While the mind can be the temporal, you can in the memory we can go, in the consciousness of course can be accessed through the memory, while the body is something which is spatial, which is extended into the external space. So this is the major understandings of the body in philosophical tradition. Now we come to the question that which I have shared in the abstract, that what is the salience, what is the importance of the body in the current epistemological discourse. And epistemology means that how do we make sense of the word, because this is the fact that we are making sense of the word. We never come across the word as a blind playful sensation. The fact that we are able to operate in the word because we are making sense of the word. Now philosophers ask that how the word comes as regular, predictable. What is the mechanism required for that? So, so in this field, Emmanuel, of course, before him, there were a lot of philosophers in the Greek philosophy, also in the British empiricism and the rationalistic tradition has done that. But with Kant, it comes to the culmination. So he says that in order to perceive the world, we require mostly the two things. This is the very, like in the very reductive way I am talking about Kant, who is otherwise like a lot more nuanced and complicated. That he says, on the one hand, we require the sensory data. There is something data which should come from the external world, and our mind should have the certain categories or the concept which process them further, and it result into the knowledge. And this knowledge is conceptual knowledge. Like we say, I see the boy, I see a boy, I see the white color. So in this way I am predicating the experiences. So this model is considered as the representational model in Western philosophy. Next slide. So now we are asked the question that is perception like conceptual through and through? Because on the one, does the perceptual act finally culminates into the linguistic expression like P is Q? What does it mean? It means that, okay, whenever we are experiencing the word, we are experiencing anything. So finally, it leads to the knowledge. And this knowledge is something which can always be codified into a kind of uh, linguistic expression or like in the proposition like P is Q. So why it is said so? Because whenever we are having the knowledge, so this means we are making any affirmation or negation about the word, about the state of affairs in the word. Now, when we do that, so we require the concepts, we require something in order to affirm or negate, we require the concept on the basis of which we make the statements. So, so there is a very huge debate on this, but coming back, but the thing is that the bottom line is that whenever we experience the word, we always experience in the conceptual manner. The Kantian argues, on the one hand, they argues that there is nothing like the bare given in the word, what they call as the myth of the given. Whenever we experience the word, it is always conceptually. So our mind already conceptualize it. Now there is some people say, okay, these concepts are formal, while on the other hand, some people say, okay, these concepts are something which are derived in the history, in the society, in the intersubjective manner. But the bottom line is clear that we knowledge takes only place at the conceptual level, whether these concepts are formal or the historically derived. So this is the basic, the framework in which the representational model operates. Now we see this neo-Cartesianism kind of conceptual model operating in the modern day also. It argues that the whatever our mental states or beliefs are there, they can be codified into the computational language or in the logical symbols. So if we talk about the AI, artificial intelligence, so it argues that the same experience which humans are having can be simulated by the machine, by AI. And how it can do that? It can do that that because any, and what is the model for that? That whenever we are having any experience, this experience can be codified finally into the logical language or into the logical symbols, and through the combination or permutation of the combination of these simple, the behavior can be generated. So any behavior kind of doing some task or doing some task or accomplishment of certain kind of the goal is possible through the operation of these logical symbols. So AI is also a Cartesian, is endorsing the Cartesianism in the manner, because it also argues that, because it also based on the premise that body is something is not required, doesn't play any role uh, in the knowledge formation. Knowledge is only in the domain of the concepts, and through the combination of these concepts, which can be codified into the logical symbol, the certain behaviors can be imitated. So this is called as the representational theory of the mind. So it argues fundamentally that any kind of the belief or the meaning can be analyzed through analyzing the syntactical structure of any proposition. Next slide. So before coming to this phenomenological notion of the word, I just want to summarize the position of that what we are arguing against. We are arguing against the conceptual notion of the knowledge, which conceptual notion of the knowledge is based on the premise that whenever we experience the word, the body provides the sensation, and at the level of the sensation or sensory data, there is no clear-cut knowledge. There is kind of obfuscation or the obscurity. Only when the concepts in the full-fledged manner operates, then this blind knowledge is processed into the conceptual knowledge, which we express in terms of the proposition. Now, phenomenological notion of the word is has a different take on it. So, first of all, a very brief introduction of phenomenology. It has started in by the famous philosopher Edmund Husserl, then taken up by the equally great philosopher Martin Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, and Levinas, and many others. And it is like, and in the last slide, I would show that how widely it is impact, how wide and the far is its influence is. But basically, on the conceptual, on the philosophical level, it argues that whenever we have to analyze anything, any event or any kind of the entity or any experience, we have to return back to the experience. We need not to analyze it in the abstraction. Rather, we have to analyze how we are living through the living experience. For example, if somebody falls ill or somebody suffering from some disease, so the phenomenology will argue that it is not the doctors or some kind of the theory which can explain the illness or the disease, rather how the people are experiencing it. So the point of view of the person who is undergoing that experience becomes crucial. So because that is the lived experience. So is the case with the people who are suffering from the communal right, violence, and so on and so forth. So it argues that our perception of the world doesn't take place in the subject-object divide, but on the basis of certain background experiences. So these background experiences, Husserl called as the horizon and the life world, what they are, we'll come into a moment. But before that, it is very important to discuss what Heidegger means by the equimental context. Now, the Cartesian framework or Kantian framework is based on the subject-object duality. And this subject-object duality is based on the fundamental kind of interpretation of the word as an object. It argues that the word we see the word as an object. There is the primacy of perception. There is a primacy of the seeing in the word, that we see the things and then we interpret it. Now Heidegger says in Being and Time, he says there are two modes of experiencing the world. First is the theoretical mode, which he called as the present at hand, and another is the practical mode, which is called as the ready to hand. Now what happens, he gives the example, suppose you are entering into a room. So at that time, how do you perceive the door? We perceive the door as an entity from which we have to get inside so that we can sit in the drawing room. So he says that we are understanding the word in the terms of the equipments, practical objects, not as a theoretical object. So he gives the example of the hammer, that whenever a person is using the hammer, he's using the hammer for performing certain tasks. Only when the hammer no longer works, it breaks down, then it becomes the theoretical object. Then we started to analyze its characteristics. Similarly, the people who are using it in terms of the health, they are saying the body is never noticed. The way we are engaging with the body, going about in the word, body never becomes the theoretical entity. Only when it falls ill, when some disease comes, then it becomes the object of reflection. Then the reflective mode arises. So Heidegger argues that the reflective mode or theoretical mode is dependent and secondary to the practical understanding of the word. So, with this, so this means our fundamental interpretation of the word is in the pragmatic. It is in the terms of the equipments, not as in the object. So how do we perceive the object, like say a car? So when we perceiving a car in some street on the road, so only our senses provides only the front profiles of the car. We don't see the back side of the car. So in any kind of the perception, there is the both visibility and the invisibility. What Husserl says that there is a perspectival givenness. We see the things only from the perspective. But does that mean since we are seeing the things only from the perspective, so we don't like rely on our senses when we don't rely on our perception? And in order to like see the things completely, we take the round around the car and then only we become sure, okay, this is the car. Husserl says no, it doesn't happen in that way. Whenever we perceive the thing, we perceive it completely, because even if we don't see the backside of the things, of the dice of the car, we our embodiment our embodiment or our situatedness tells us that if I go to the backside of the car, if I go to the if I perceive the backside of the dice, this profile will be visible to us. So this means the things which we are not seeing, they are also the possibilities on which can be realized on the basis of our embodiment. Next slide. So here we comes to the difference between the I see and I can, which is of course in the full-fledged manner is taken up is argued by Merleau-Ponty. So this notion of I can suggest that the word is experienced not in the terms of not in theoretically, not in the terms of the only the perception, but in terms of the embodied possibilities. So whenever we see any object, for example, if I'm perceiving this laptop, so I know that if I move around the laptop, I can see certain kind of the things. While I know I cannot jump and enter into the screen, because this is the possibilities not provided by my embodiment. So the word is not something which is like so word is always interpreted, anticipated on the basis of our embodiment. Whatever the possibilities our body is providing, so we interpret the word in that manner. So hence the word is not something like an object which is standing against it. Rather, word is become the my word. Word become as the possibilities which can be realized through our embodiment. Hence, Merleau-Ponty argues that body provides us the grip on the word. The word is something which is we take hold of on the basis of our body. So here the shift we can see in phenomenology from the formalism to the situated consciousness. So we don't see the word as if from the nowhere as the form in the formal manner. Formal manner means that self is not something which only job is to connect the various experiences. Rather, self is something which is situated in the word. It gives us it projects the possibilities on the word, what can be realized, what cannot be realized. So we orient ourselves in the word through our body, which hence there is not the difference between the body and the self, body and the subject. So Merleau-Ponty highlights this intermingling between the body and the word, self and the word by his neologism, which is called as the body subject. Next slide. So the notion of I can suggests that body is the locus of the experience, formness is the embodied experience. Uh, in any kind of the experience, generally it is argued that self is the ultimate thing. Its job is to, so self is a kind of a logical necessity. Self is sometimes is the kind of the logical condition because it connects all kind of the experiences. Because uh, we cannot argue the regularity of the experiences unless we have certain kind of the self which is kind of a which connect all these things. Now this self is not something like a person who is situated inside our head, but like Kant says and other philosophers also argue, this it is a logical necessity. In order to uh, show the regularity in the consciousness, unity of the consciousness, we require the self as a logical necessity. Now, phenomenology argues that this logical necessity or the self only as a formal requirement is a kind of a very thin or impoverished notion of the self, because as a being in the world, because we are experiencing the world, and we always experience that the world is something which is realized in the terms of our embodied possibility. If I see a chair, I know I can pull up this chair. If I see a mountain, I know I can only climb in the mountain. I cannot move that mountain. So this kind of the word is so the word become a normative. Word become a kind of the locus of the possibilities uh, on the basis of our embodiment. So this body gives us orientation in the world, which Molle-Ponty says that body becomes the 0 point. It is a kind of the center on the basis of which we orient the space around us. So the space is experienced in the terms of the left, right, near, far, below, above, on the basis of our embodiment. So space is not only cannot be exhausted only in the geometrical sense, in the Euclid sense, but even before it becomes the geometrical or the formal, spaces first of all experience existentially on the basis of our engagement, that it is left to me, right to me, this is near and the far below our. Even a child who takes a birth, she also engages with the space in that fashion. So this gives the orientation to the subject, embodied subject in the world. Hubert Refers says that this is the fundamental kind of knowing, which is called as the coping. So he said this awareness of the space of the entities around us in the terms of our body, he called as this is the fundamental kind of the knowing, which is he called as the coping. Next slide. So in this slide, we explain a detail at length what is actually he means Hubert Dreyfus means by coping. So he, on the basis of Heidegger's distinction between the ready to hand, present at hand, between the theoretical knowledge and the practical knowledge, he develops his notion of coping. So he says, on the one hand, there are certain kind of the skills which require the conscious application of the rules, conceptual knowledge. But he said there are certain kinds of the practical skills like swimming, dancing, music, listening to music, etc. These comes under the practical skills. He says when we it is possible when we are learning this at the start, in the beginning we have certain kind of the conscious rules, but when as we develop the mastery into that, we develop the skill. What he says, the skillful, he says we develop the skill, and this skill enable us to develop the mastery over these skills. So, for example, if a dancer is totally into her dance, so she doesn't require, and when she is in the she's making the innovation, or she's making a certain kind of the expert move, so she not always require the conscious application of the rule. Rather, she senses the situation in terms of the performance of the task, that this is the goal she has to achieve, and on the basis of that there is a kind of the she copes up with the situation. So this doesn't require the conscious application of the rule, rather she becomes one with the situation. So this is what Dreyfus called as the skillful coping. So this previous experiences, which that is why he says that skill or the mastery over the skills require the conscious kind of the practice. So this previous experiences help us to sense the situation in a better way, and and this this enable us to cope up the situation in a skillful way. So either the mountaineers, if we talks about the mountaineers or any kind of the swimming, so this requires the practical skill. And in the practical skill, we not necessarily always require the conscious applications of the rules. So the previous experience, so the phenomenological awareness is something which is between the reflex and the conscious cognitive behavior. So phenomenological awareness, not like the reflex behavior, something which is reflexive in nature, nor it is like a conscious cognitive behavior where we are applying the rules deliberately, but there is something which is in between, intentional, which is called as the pre-reflecting and the non-objective application of the non-objective awareness. So how this is possible? This Molle-Ponty explained through the body schema. Next slide. Okay, so what is the body schema? Now we have this, for example, if we are, if we are running and we see any overhanging branch, so we duck that even before we make a conscious decision that I have to duck that. Or suppose we are if we are eating a very delicious food in our hand, so we, while eating that fastly, we never cut our fingers, we never eat our fingers most of the time. So how does this happen? This Molle-Ponty says that this is the body schema. Body schema is like a awareness of the body. We know that how the body, how we need to control our actions, our movement, and we automatically adjust to the situation. For example, he gives the example of like Danja. He gives the example of a of a of the tennis match, that the people who are playing the tennis or the badminton, so when they are totally engrossed in the game, so they know which move to make and which move not to make. So this making this elasticity to the body is provided by the awareness of the body schema. So this is the quote from the Gallagher and Joby in the Phenomenological Mind. Body schematic processes are responsible for motor control and involve sensory motor capacities, abilities, and habits that enable movement and the maintenance of posture. Such processes are not perceptions, beliefs, or feelings, but sensory motor function that continue to operate when the intentional object of perception is something other than one's own body. On the other hand, however, the body schema also includes our pre-reflective, proprioceptive awareness of our bodily action. So as this code suggests, this body schema is necessary for the motor control. So the motor control of the body, that which move has to make, which move has not to make, it is not the consciously done. Rather, it is something which is already ingrained in our engagement with the world. So we need not to remind ourselves that to operate our body in the particular fashion. Rather, this become our fundamental way of engaging with the world. Next slide. So this is what Molle-Ponty talks, that this is like a body schema is something like the pre-reflective non-conceptual grasp of the world. And we can understand it better if we use the example of the games, of the practical skill like the swimming. Or for example, if we are like walking in the market, and we are returning to our home and we are engrossed in the thinking, but we automatically know where to go, how to move to the how to climb up a stairs, and how to open the door. We need not to consciously remind ourselves, okay, this is the door, this is the stairs, and this is the way the things has to be done. So this means our engagement with the word happens fundamentally at the pre-reflective and in the non-conceptual manner. We also grasp the word in the non-conceptual way. So in this kind of the awareness, body recede to the background, and there is the non-objectifying awareness of the body. We So there is nothing like a conceptual understanding of the body in this kind of the engagement, and there is a non-objectifying awareness of the body, that there is the body, there is a tacit awareness that I am the embodied, these things are being done, but there is this awareness is the non-objectifying. This is nothing like the objectifying. We don't require the objectification or the conceptual understanding all the way. So in this way, how do we understand the environment? So this is the focal point of this talk, that we don't understand, that phenomenology argues that we don't understand the word in the subject-object duality. The word is something which is the objects which need to be analyzed or interpreted in the conceptual manner. It is true when we are engaged in the scientific theories or in the scientific analysis, but our everyday experience does not endorse that. In the everyday experiences, the word of the dancer, the word of the swimmer, the word of the everyday person, he or she always interprets the word in the terms of the possibilities. What kind of the possibility it affords to us? The word is basically the word of affordances. So, for example, if I'm giving this lecture in Zoom, and if I'm totally engaged in that, but at the same time, I'm aware that what kind of the affordances, what kind of the possibilities is provided by the online lecture, and what kind of the possibilities provided in the face-to-face lecture. So, so my my body and myself, my being already interpret always interprets the word in terms of the possibilities on the basis of the mode of the on the basis of my embodiment. So sometimes there is the disruption of this I can, it happens, which is also our phenomenological experience of the illness, which we might discuss in the next class. Can we go to the back previous slide? Yeah, previous slide, previous slide. Yeah, of the illness. Like for example, the people who fall ill. So, uh, so we find that they don't feel the word in terms of the affordances. The same market which they have been going easily, now they can no longer go. The same kind of the activities which enables them, which they have been doing easily, now they are no longer able to go. So this is the I can. This is the disruption of the I can. A person who is playing, say, the tennis, and suddenly some pain arises in her body. At that time, he don't feel so at that time the possibilities she was projecting on her body are disrupted because of this, because of the emergence of pain. Next slide. So here we come to the most important notion of Merleau-Ponty, which he calls as the lived body. Now the all analysis of the body which we have done, first of all, what we, before coming to this slide, uh, um, uh, uh, let us remind again what we have done so far. First, that phenomenology, we argued that phenomenology doesn't talk about the word in the subject-object duality. It see the word as the possibilities, and this possibility is relies on the basis of our background experiences, on the basis of our embodiment. Now uh, this body embodiment, and this embodiment is again based on what Merleau-Ponty called as the body schema. So embodiment is not something which is only at the concept, but it is a lived experience. So when, because of the body schema, I am aware that I'm aware of the possibilities which my body is providing to me while engaging with the world. So Merleau-Ponty says this realization of the possibilities rather make the body as the lived body. So lived body is something which we know that how which has realized its possibilities or projected its possibilities on the world. So whatever so sedimentation of the previous experience happens in the lived body, which is called as the body schema. So that is why lived body of an athlete would be the different from the lived body of the person who is not an athlete, who has not who is not an athlete person. The lived body of the person who is who or she is a dancer, or who is some performs say some other kind of deft in certain other kind of the practical skills, would be different from the another person who has not realized it. Why? Because through their body they have seen the word in the different manner. They have realized those possibilities of the word which is not accessible, which is not realized by the another person. So all these kind of the previous experiences get sedimented into our body, and that's just why this body becomes the lived body. So lived body provides us the grip of on our surroundings. We interpret our surroundings on the basis of our lived experiences we have, which is accumulated in our body. So the example which Merleau-Ponty highlights the importance of the lived body through the example of the phantom limb. So in the many people experiences whose arms, whose limb get amputated, so they feel the experience of the phantom pain or the phantom limb. Now, why this happens? According to Merleau-Ponty, the Merleau-Ponty interpretation is this, that there is a kind of the disorientation between the lived body and the present body, because the lived body enables him to project a certain possibilities in the world when his body was kind of quote unquote normal. Now in the present body, her or his arm is amputated, so he cannot no longer realize that possibility. So this creates the disorientation in the experiencing subject. So with this we come to the kind of conclusion that phenomenologically we don't see the word as an objective entity which has to be represented through the conceptualization. Rather, we see ourselves as the being in the word, where we see the word as in the embodied possibilities to be realized in the lived time. So this means that we are the self, embodied self being in the word, and we see the word as the possibilities, embodied possibilities, which we realize in the lived time. That is why the body subject always interprets the word in the terms of its embodied possibilities. I can is the fundamental phenomenological experience of the embodied self. So I can is not something which is added to, which is the reflective or which is something added to the self, but it is the fundamental experience which we have. So that is why we have used the example of the dice of the car, which is the basic examples. Like whenever we see the car, we experience it, even though we don't see the backside of the car, back profiles of the car, we still experience it as a count it as the perception, because we know that if we move around the car we will have this possible we can realize it. So this perception is possible through the motility of the body, and this motility of the body is based on our embodiment, the fundamental experience of the body as in something which can move, which can see the things around. So this ability of the body, this motility of the body, this ability to move and see the things from the various dimension give the self the sense of I can. Next slide. So this notion of the lived body and this motility of the body, which through which it can realize the world in the different way, has been impacted the lot of field. Uh, this is for the further reference to the people who are interested in the domain of embodied phenomenology. Like in the cognitive sciences, this embodied cognition, which is used in the Don Javi, Hubert Raffers, Francisco Varela, they have used it. And those who are especially interested in the relationship between the AI and the embodiment, they can see the work. They can refer to the work of the Hubert Raffers, John Hockland, who has made the important phenomenological contribution to the in the area of AI from the perspective of phenomenology. In sociology, Pierre Bourdieu's habitus is heavily influenced by the notion of phenomenological notion of body and all that. In Michel Foucault, discourse analysis, body is something which is controlled and made docile through the disciplinary mechanism. That is also the current discourse on body. In gender studies, Butler argues that there is the absence of the gender body in the Merleau-Ponty, and Eric Gray says there is a forgetting of the sexual difference. So even in gender studies, the phenomenological insights of embodied phenomenology is used, and they have given the gender term, that how the different genders have the different kind of the lived body, how they realize the different kind of they see the world in the different manner. And in critical theory, we can see there is also a discussion on the Dalit bodies by the Gopal Group, Black bodies by French Fanon, and the queer bodies by Sarah Ahmed. Next slide. Thank you for this. So I hope this has made sense and generated interest. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saurabh, for such an interesting talk on, I think, an area that is of a growing interest in several fields. One of embodiment, especially in the area of consciousness. I think we've all learned a lot. So the field is now open for any questions that anyone may have. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat box, or if you could just raise your hand, then we could unmute you as well. The raise hand function, I think in some systems, I think the more recent systems, is if you just click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, you should see a raise hand function. Otherwise, in older systems, you just have to go to the participants, click on the participants link, click your name, and if you, I think, or just at the bottom of that screen, there should be a raise hand function. So either way, please feel free. Any questions you have, I think so I'll be happy to answer.
The hand raised by Varun, I think.
Sure. Could you just unmute him?
Yes. Yeah, he's unmuted.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So my question is, I think, first of all, I think it was a brilliant lecture, but my question is regarding, there is this conceptualization of Merleau-Ponty done by some scholars where his work has been compared with the ideas in analytic philosophy of mind, especially the work of panpsychism, where it is seen that panpsychism, though it is completely part of a different tradition, but there has been some conceptualization and comparison between this embodied phenomenology and panpsychism. So where can you locate his ideas? Because if I'm not wrong, there is a scholar called Jennifer McKinney and David Abrams who have argued that you can sort of reinterpret Ponty's work in the holistically in the framework of panpsychism. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
So Pusha, can I answer right now?
So maybe I think there are 2-3 more questions. If we can just hear them, that might be, would that be okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think Mr. Narasimha Murthy had a question. Please go ahead, sir. You'd, I think, put it in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for your lecture. Like my question is regarding this. Like we spoke about the self is the logical necessity for continuous consciousness. So, like when we are talking about continuous consciousness means like there must be discontinued or like a break or gap in consciousness, right? Like how do you address that? Like when we are sleeping, or when we are unconscious, like how how does this consciousness works? Like any thought, or I would appreciate.
So, Usha, can I answer these two questions first?
Sure, sir. I think I see a couple of more raised hands. Can we just quickly hear them as well?
Sure, sure. Okay,
Sure.
let's do
I
that.
think Miss Kanchan, if you'd like to go. Niharika, could you just unmute her?
Yes.
I'm very new to phenomenology. Maybe for the first time I'm hearing, so I really don't know whether question is is it related to the field. But I just want to clarify when we are talking so much of embodiment or maybe body consciousness. Does it also related to because consciousness comes from the realm of mind? So how do we relate phenomenology to not just body consciousness but body mind consciousness? Because being conscious of the body, then like we have seen, you have also elaborated upon like in literature, for example, black body, this body, this body. So perception also changes. So that perception comes from the mind always. So how do we respond to body mind consciousness in embodiment especially?
Okay.
So if you want to quickly answer these, then maybe we can take more questions or.
Okay, yeah. So thanks, Varun, for the question. And this is an interesting field, though I'm not aware of the comparison between Merleau-Ponty and panpsychism, because panpsychism, I'm not a scholar in panpsychism, but I think it says that everything is like consciousness, right? Hello.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 So,
Panpsychism. Hello.
yeah.
There are different, conception within this panpsychist sort of ontology. Like there is this idea of pan-experientialism, which is seen in the work of Whitehead, and then we have Henry Bergson.
Yeah.
I mean, there is overlapping, and there is no one understanding regarding what panpsychism is. But
yeah. So, but on the one hand, panpsychism is against the reductionism, either especially the reduction in the materialism. So they say, okay, so even the material can be understood in the conscious way. Even these entities also can be the conscious. Now, phenomenology methodologically would be the against any kind of reductionism. Either it is in the consciousness or it is in the like in the matter. But yes, on the there can be the comparison if we take the later works of Merleau-Ponty, especially this visible and the invisible, when he talk about the intertwining and the flesh, that there is a chiasm in the word and there is the intertwining of the flesh. So we never know where the mind ends and the body starts. So there is the intertwining in terms of the flesh. So I see that there can be the parallels on that. So, but I'm not sure that how, like, whether it will logically lead to the panpsychism or Merleau-Ponty. I think the Merleau-Ponty was trying to come out of the metaphysical language. So he used these kind of the neophyte. So this is my like the quick answer to this. Another question by Narasimha Murthy ji. So he asked that how do we explain the gap in the consciousness? Now the gap in the consciousness, first the phenomenology argues that it talks about the consciousness of the experience which is lived by us. So this is not the lived experience, like the experience of being the unconscious, but the fact, like even the Advaita also argues, and at some point the Husserl also says that the fact we are saying that we were unconscious, we are remembering that. So this means there is a continuity in the experience, because logically, if we don't have any experience, we can't even remember that. The fact that we are positing, okay, this is the gap we had, this means we have the minimal awareness of that gap, the which we can't which we don't experience at all, that we can't even posit it. So that's how I would like to answer it. And third by the Kanchana, the question I could not fully grasp, but I think uh, 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 Can you just shortly paraphrase your question, Kanchana?
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute you, Kanchana. Are you here? Yeah.
How this body mind conscious, how does embodiment respond to body mind consciousness? Because even the consciousness of the body also comes from the mind.
Okay. Yeah. So they argue that this. So this is the catch, that this experience in the consciousness of the body, how it comes to us in the conceptual manner or in the non-conceptual manner. Now, if we say that it comes through the mind, so how mind in the sense that we say, okay, when the mind say I'm having this experience in the language, in the professional language it is posing, then we say, okay, it is consciousness is dependent on the conceptualization of the mind. On the other hand, they argue that even before the mind's faculties, conceptual faculty operate, we have the tacit awareness of the body, which is immediate in the nature. So this is what phenomenology argues, that awareness of the body doesn't happen in the conceptual or in the mindful way, but is it rather a non-conceptual or in the immediate way this consciousness happens. For example, if you're talking to me right now, you are listening to me, but at the same time you are aware that you are embodied. You are not remembering, or your mind is not telling you all that. This is the part of the consciousness. So that would be the my answer for this.
Thank you, sir. I see a couple of hands up as well. I think Ms. Vishakha has had a hand up for quite a while. Please go ahead.
Hello, sir. My question is, what is your belief and opinion on the role of language? What is the role of language and phenomenology? And also Heidegger's view of, ontological world that he introduced us with, us as in literature scholars. So how can we use his concepts in our own study? Thank you, sir, for the session. It was worth listening to.
I see a couple of questions in the chat box as well. I think somebody had raised, and then Ria, yeah, Miss Ria, could you please go ahead?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my connection is a little weak. Thank you, sir, for this talk. It was a good summary of the whole philosophical school. My only question to you is, in terms of social science research, what do you think is the import of phenomenology? What kind of a tool or sort of a perspective has phenomenology given to social science research?
So there are also a couple of questions from the chat box. I think, for instance, I think Miss Sangeeta Shah has a question. If you'd like to ask your question, you can just, unmute yourself. Or Miss Sangeeta, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. Basically my question was, since my research is related to language, and sir had stated something about language and how in the embodied living experience, how this language is connected. I just couldn't understand that concept. If he can explain it again, it would be great.
Thank you. So, why we're doing this is actually we've started this just in order to be able to hear other people and hear their voices and have this be a more interactive session. So that was the spirit behind having everyone ask their questions personally, and then maybe having the speaker answer them. So if there are any other questions, I think Mr. Biplab had a question. Please go ahead, sir, if you'd like to ask the question.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so as Dr. Todaria just explained that, there are certain instances when we do not have the objects of our perception immediately present before our senses, but we could conceptually grasp them. So Dr. Todaria, can you just kindly explain or elaborate the mechanism of intentionality that works in such contexts?
So, sir, would you like to answer these couple of questions before we move to the next set, or?
Yeah, sure. Because these are the 3-4 questions, so let me try to answer that. So the first question about the Heidegger's notion of, especially aimed at the Heidegger's notion of language. So yes, later Heidegger, especially, especially Heidegger, who wrote about the poetry, language, thought, and in the letter on humanism, he talks about the poetry. So for Heidegger, language is something which is, for him, the language is something which is the poetic language. And what Heidegger wanted to do, that he said the language always try to represent the things, represent the thing to make the thing present representative. So he say only the poetic language, which is the somewhere between the speaking and the silence, it does not represent the thing. It does not objectify the thing. So later Heidegger's whole effort is to come out of this metaphysical language and to use the poetic language, which he says, which he uses the word called Gelassenheit, letting be, which lets the others be without. So how we let the other things be without objectifying, without doing violence with the language. So this is what this is what the later Heidegger's take on language. Another question by the Ria Mittal is that how to use the phenomenology in the social research. So basically phenomenology is especially, this is a very wide question. So in short, I would like to answer that there is a empirical model of the in the social science, which is which is based on the explanation that social sciences operates on the basis of the causal law, which can be explained while following a methodological rigor. On the other hand, there is a, based on the phenomenology, there is another model in social science, which is called the understanding, which has come from the Dilthey and all that, that the social events cannot be explained in the way of, in the causal fashion, the way we interpret the scientific object, but rather we only interpret them. So, for example, India got independence in 1947. The meaning of this statement can only be analyzed in the future only, because whether it was good to get the independence in the 1947 is not dependent on that moment. It depends on the future moment. Suppose if India doesn't progress that well, we say, okay, that's not a good event. And suppose India progressed by the leap and bounds, then we say, okay, this was a very great event. So this interpretation, so social events always interpreted in terms of the futurity. That's why Heidegger says there is the primacy of future in the time. Then the next question about the embodiment and language. What I meant by that, that I have used that whenever we are using the especially in the computational or the representational model, language is something, the meaning of anything can be represented through the logical symbols. So suppose if I say, I want to do certain tasks, so that can always be analyzed, always can be broken down in certain logical symbols. And through the analysis of that logical symbols, we can interpret, we can explain the behavior. So that is why all the social media or this artificial intelligence are using this model only. That on the basis of our behavior we do on the social media, they form the, they predict us that which YouTube channel or which kind of the post we are going to like. So this is the model is used by the AI and all that. While Merleau-Ponty says that our experience of the word is based on the embodiment. Even before we conceptualize the word, we are already plugged in the word. I don't require a concept in order to pull up the chair, in order to listen the song, or in order to sing. This is something which is developed by our constant engagement of our lived body with the word. Now, Vipul's question is that how we intend how phenomenologically we can explain the intention of the object which are not immediately present. Now, when Brentano talks about the intentionality, he says, or Husserl talks about the intentionality. So it is not, intentionality is not something which is only the object which is present to us. Intentionality means whatever we are, whenever the consciousness, we think of the consciousness, is always the consciousness of. And this consciousness of can be any fantastical object which is not in the present, of the imaginary object. So, but in all these things, the bottom line is that consciousness will always remain intending to something. Yeah. So that would be my answer. I hope it's satisfied.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I see a couple of more questions as well in the chat box, as well as a couple of raised hands. Can I ask Mr. Jayaprakash to please ask his question?
Sir, as you mentioned, the bodily experiences are pre-reflective experiences, and you cites example of not biting hand at the time of eating or playing tennis. This bodily movement are kind of pre-reflective. So, sir, how far these pre-reflective experiences are different from a priori experiences or a priori knowledge, or both the things are same?
Okay. Thank you, sir. Can I ask Mr. Rupesh Kote, who's put his question in the chat box, to please ask the question if you would like. Mr. Rupesh, are you here?
Yes, yes.
I got one message. If somebody wants to
Yeah.
listen to the topic.
Now, is body and flesh the same and can be interchangeably used in phenomenology? Because when we talk about Jean-Luc Marien's erotic phenomena, the concept of flesh seems to be different there. So, yes, sir. This is my question.
Lot of disturbance. Can you write down your question, or
Yeah,
try
yeah.
again?
He has written it down. So the question is our body and flesh the same, and can they be interchangeably used in phenomenology? That is the question. There is another question by, I think, Ms. Archana Vittal. Would you like to ask your question, Ms. Archana? Okay, so I'll just read out her question then. It is, by lived experience, do we only refer to people who more actively use their bodies, like dancers or swimmers, or does it encompass, say, a vocal singer's experience as well? That is the question. So I think that those are all the questions that we have. If there are any more questions, I think we'd be happy to take them in the WhatsApp chat as well, if the time has run out here. And I think Varun had another question as well. Yeah, please go ahead, Mr. Varun.
So my question is that any difference between representational theory of mind and the functionalist understanding of mind, the way it is, functionalist in the analytic trend, functionalist or the computational theory of mind, or are this the same? Is just a brief answer.
So if you could maybe answer these, and yeah.
All right. So the first question is that how do we difference how this body schema is different from the a priori knowledge. Now, a priori knowledge is something which is prior to experience. So prior to experience, what is the prior to experience? Like if we use, because first of all, it is used by Kant, like in a epistemological sense. Like for example, if we are seeing the events in the world, Kant argues that whenever we see the events in the world, we will always see in the terms of the cause and effect, before and the after. There is nothing like we don't see the things. If we don't see the things in this fashion, then we become the man of the moment, right? We can't explain the memory. So this is, he says, this is the a priori. This is nothing which the experience can give to us. This is something which is the fundamental part of the consciousness. Now, body schema, now one can argue, on the other hand, okay, this body schema is also a priori thing. It is prior to experience because it shaped the experience in the particular way. But phenomenology like to dissolve it. It says there is a whenever, because we are being in the world. So there is nothing like the a priori. There is the being in the word. Our fundamental of experience of the word cannot be divided in terms of the subject object, because that would be the abstraction, non-phenomenological. If we are talking about the phenomenology, this means we cannot give primacy either to the consciousness or to the word. There is the intermingling between that. So in that sense, this body schema is phenomenological in nature rather than a priori. Now, second question was there was second question on. I just forget the second question. Okay, so let me take that. There was some question on body and flesh. Are they same or interchangeably used in phenomenology? So yes, as we know, there is a difference between the conception of body in Merleau-Ponty. In the phenomenology of perception, he talks about the embodiment, while in the later, in the visible and invisible, he talks about the flesh. Now, I think there is a certain similarities also, because even in phenomenology of perception, he talks about the intertwining, which is the characteristics of flesh. What is intertwining? He says the body has the double sensations. When I touch something, so he gives the example in phenomenology of perception, left hand touching right hand. So when left hand touch right hand, so after some time, we cannot say, we cannot decide that which is touching and which is getting touched. On the one hand, we feel, okay, left hand is touching the right hand. On the simultaneously, we can also see that the right hand is touching the or getting touched. So we cannot say which is touching and which is getting touched. So this he called as the double sensation. And there is a kind of the intertwining in the flesh, double sensation of the flesh. And this insight, I think he extended in the notion of the flesh, where he say, even if we touch the word, even if we touch the objects, like for example, like Dr. Pusha is here, so she's like MD in Ayurveda. So suppose if you are touching the natural objects in the world, like the soil, or like we are touching water, so we cannot always we cannot say that which is getting touched and which is getting touched. So there is a kind of the intertwining. So I think yes, there is a difference between the body and flesh, but I think the seeds were already there in the notion of the double sensation of body in phenomenology of perception, which is extended to the notion of the flesh. Of course, there are more other differences in the terms of the metaphysics and all that, which we can discuss some other time. And there was another question: by lived experience, do we only refer to people who are more actively use their bodies, like dancers or singers, or does it encompass, say, a vocal singer's experience we have? Yeah, when lived experience is something which is experience which we are living. It is nothing like only the one person. This is the fundamental experience that we are living the experience. Either he or she is a dancer, swimmer, or vocal singer, or like a craftsman, but whatever they are experiencing, it is getting accumulated in their body schema. So that is why even a vocal singer is sings a classical song, so they are easily get attuned with it. So this attunement with one's skill is possible through this lived experience. Now, while another question was Varun, that how this representational theory is different from the functional theory of the mind. So I think this functional theory is like different from the behaviorism. I think this functional theory is endorsed by Hilary Putnam and all that. It says through the function you can understand the mind. The way, for example, AI and anything, the way they are functioning, you are able to understand the mental states. So, so this is an interesting question. I think I need to think on that. I'll think over that and get back to you on this.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. I think now we are actually running out of time. So maybe we'll just take a last question. And sir is available on WhatsApp as well. And so we'll just hear the question now, and the answer, I think sir will probably put in the WhatsApp chat group, and it'll also be mailed to you as a compiled question and answer list as a Google Doc, which is also for our records, but that will be shared with all participants. So let's just wind up with one last question. Can I request Ms. Sanjana to please ask the question?
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, sir. Thank you for your lecture. I just had one question. So I see like a parallel between the aims of like a social science like anthropology, which tries to understand like the diversity of like human experiences, and phenomenology, which is trying to theorize like the nature of embodiment and like the nature of like human experience. Is there like scope for doing philosophy in a way that employs like methods of ethnography to theorize, to contribute to like theorizing concepts such as embodiment and lived experience, and how do we kind of bring philosophy and anthropology together to work in tandem to answer these questions? Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for that very interesting question, Sanjana. I'd just like to read out one last question by Mr. Sundar. I'm sorry, we didn't have time to take it. He asks, in reality, when we're interacting with the world, we're operating at the level of thoughts and emotions on a dynamic basis, where the perceptual and conceptual frameworks are being dynamically reformed and reshaped. So would that be a blend of phenomenology and conceptual viewpoints? So as I said, Dr. Saurabh is also a part of the WhatsApp group, and you could also mail him. He's been kind enough to share his email. So if you have any queries, you could also write to us at NIA's Consciousness Studies Program. Our email ID will be shared with you. So there's one last announcement that I wish to make before we wind up. This is regarding an attendance for this course. As you all know, this course is also available for crediting. And for those of you who wish to credit this course, there are a couple of attendance requirements that you have. So toward this, what we have done is we have, and I think that will be shared with you actually right here as well as in the WhatsApp group. And it will also be mailed to you. I'm sorry, it'll also be open in the WhatsApp group, and it'll be available for now. So basically, it just requires people who wish to credit the course to please mention at what time they entered the meeting, because there's this requirement that says if you, have logged in before half an hour, that is, the course starts at 3:30, and if you join before 4, that's fine. But if for whatever reason you've been logged out during that time and you've had to log in again post 4, then you might just need to mention why that was, and maybe you could mail us, or you could just put it there. There's a column there as well. So this, I repeat, is for people who wish to credit the course, because attendance requirements are compulsory for certificate issuing at the end of the course. Also, same goes for the assignments. Assignments will be mailed to you after every lecture, and those of you who wish to credit the course will again have to take these assignments a little seriously. At least out of 18 lectures, I think 15 assignments are compulsory for those of you who wish to credit it. For those of you who wish to audit, of course, this is not a requirement. Yeah, so the assignment for this particular today's lecture by Dr. Saurabh, he has given us, he has shared with all of us, and this has been shared by mail as well, a book. And chapter 4 of that book needs to be read, and it can be done at your own leisure. You have 10 days before the assignment is due. So please go through it at your leisure, and also analyze any bit of reading, whether it is a novel, whether it is any other fiction or non-fiction that you have read, based on the principles that that the author employs in his analysis of Merleau-Ponty. So I repeat, it's chapter 4 of the book that has been shared with you. This is the assignment for this week that has been set by Dr. Saurabh. So the assignment so I hope all of you have, I just direct your attention to the WhatsApp chat group, to the chat group, the Zoom chat, where the attendance sheet has been put. So it's a Google Doc, and there might be a little confusion that you experience initially. So it is open for 24 hours, just so that you will be able to circumvent it yourself. It is open for comment. So any of you who wish to enter what time you joined today, today we shared it at the end because we did not want confusion during the session. From next week onwards, hopefully you would have had time to go through this and familiarize yourself. So those of you who wish to credit the course, please make sure that this will be available, put up right here and in the WhatsApp chat just before the session begins. So those of you who wish to join, please immediately clock your attendance whenever you join. This is an initiative that we've brought in to make this process of attendance taking, less school teachery, where, everyone's monitoring who's coming, who's going, and we leave it more on the participants to say, yeah, I came now and I left here because I had some reason. So the onus is on people who wish to credit it. So please do access this. This will be open for 24 hours after today's lecture. We've started this only today, and this will now be the format for attendance taking for the next 16 lectures to come. So if you have any queries about this, please do mail us and we will do our best to answer you. Also, if some people, I think we found that they find it difficult through the laptop, then do try through your phone. Or if you're trying through your phone, then try through your laptop. And sometimes these glitches happen. So we've tried our best to set right these glitches and make this a seamless process for you. But if you do have any doubts, you're welcome to write to us. And we look forward to seeing you all for a lecture next Monday. We apologize for this delay this week. Next Monday, the lecture will again be by Dr. Saurabh Todaria. And we welcome you all and look forward to having you all next Monday, same time.
Yeah. Just a minute.
Sure.
I think I have shared the link. I'm resharing it again. It is of the right docs, and it's of the philosophy course sheet. You can see it right here. The WhatsApp group will also be open immediately. It is already open, and the same message will be shared there. So please don't worry if you're not able to access it on the Zoom chat box. You will find the link on the WhatsApp chat also. That doc is in comment mode. You can just leave your comment in the 4th column, and you can note down your attendance. It's a easy process, but Dr. Pushya, Meera, and me are always there to help you out on WhatsApp also. So please don't worry. It's a very simple process, and everyone can mark their attendance. Over to you, Dr. Pushya.
Thanks a lot, Niharika. And so I'd just like to thank Dr. Saurabh for his lecture today. And if there are no more announcements, and if there's nothing, I apologize for this rather long announcement because it was needed, and we've also been struggling with this online mode. So please bear with us as we navigate this. I request now my colleague Meera, who's also a doctoral scholar at NIAS, to please deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, Meera.
Meera. Yeah,
You're muted. Yeah, I could just unmute now. So thank you, Dr. Pushya. And for those of you who are confused about the attendance sheet, very sorry. We have reshared it in the Zoom chat, and we will be resharing it in the WhatsApp also. So no worries. And apart from that, thank you so much, Dr. Saurabh, for this enlightening lecture. Like always, you did a fantastic job. We always look forward to your lectures on phenomenology. So thank you so much for making it happen again. And thank you, Dr. Sankita Menon, for conceptualizing this wonderful course, which is why we are all here together today. And thank you, Dr. Pushya, for coordinating this course, and Niharika for always being vigilant and on Zoom, answering all our questions in the chat box and everywhere. So thank you, Niharika. And thank you, Ashwini and Abhishek, who are working behind as part of our team, making this happen. So thanks to them as well. And once again, I want to thank all of you who are here today for being such a great audience and for asking relevant questions. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you again in the next class.